Welcome to the NFP Podcast, where we explore the empowering world of natural family planning. I'm Amy Smith. Join me and my co-host Emily Appledorn each week. Together, we're here to dive deep into the science, the stories, and the spirituality behind NFP. Every week, we push back against the free love culture and advocate for a culture of responsible love, where intentionality and respect are at the forefront of family planning. Join us as we discuss everything from the practicalities of charting and fertility awareness to the profound impact NFP can have on relationships and communities. Whether you're new to NFP or a seasoned pro, our podcast is your go-to resource for honest conversations, expert insights, and real-life experiences. So grab a friend, settle in, and get ready to be inspired. This is the NFP Podcast.
All right, guys, welcome back to the NFP Podcast.
Hi, everyone.
Today, I'm very excited. Emily and I have on a special guest with us to share her beautiful story. Lynn is with us. Welcome to the podcast, Lynn.
Thank you, Amy Lynn. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to see you. So let's start with just a little bit of background. Maybe you can frame for our audience, I guess, your growing up time, your formation as a small person into young adulthood, in regards to kind of the worldview that you grew up with human sexuality, whether that was, with church teaching, without church teaching, etc. What was that like in your home, conversations that were had, in school, etc.?
Well, so I guess I would first define myself as a deeply devout Catholic woman, and I really attribute that to my mom, who was also devout. And by age 13, she was going to daily mass. She had attended what we believed at the time was an authentic Marian vision. So she had a deep conversion at that point. She'd always been very faithful, but she started attending daily mass and did so until the day that she passed. So I was brought up as a very devout Catholic. We prayed often. We went to mass weekly. I went to Catholic school for 3 years. We were in transition. We moved from northern Maine. And while we were in transition and lived in an apartment where our family home was being built, I was able to attend Catholic school, which was very meaningful for me. So from the middle of first grade, when we moved from Maine, to about the middle of third grade, I attended Catholic school. And transitioning back to public school at that point, once we moved, was extremely difficult for me. So I wouldn't say that in my home we had a lot of conversations about sexuality. I mean, my mom was of the generation you didn't talk about that. In fact, I started my period fairly early, and my mom had never talked to me about that. Now, I knew what it was because my neighbor had told me, my friend, but my mom hadn't talked about it. And in fact, I was incredibly embarrassed the day that it happened to go to my mom and to talk about that. So we just never had those conversations. And yet I remember her being extremely comforting, and I cried. And so she just thought I was being silly, right? Because this is just natural and you do it. But it's the fact that we had just never had those conversations. And yet I knew, obviously, the teachings about sexuality in the church and being chaste, and remaining a virgin until you're married. And those were, that was something I can't actually recall. I mean, I'm 66 now, so I can't actually recall specific conversations. It's more like, I just had this awareness, and I knew because of how we brought up and grew up in the church, and I just knew that. So I had a very strong moral compass as a teenager. And I wasn't allowed to date until I was 16. But what I found after that, because of this intense moral compass that I had, is that then I sort of, I think I would describe it at this point in my life as almost an unhealthy fear. But it was a fear that kept me out of bad situations. So I avoided parties. I didn't smoke. I didn't drink. I never tried drugs. Certainly didn't engage in sexuality as an adolescent and a teenager. And so I became known as sort of the good girl. And the one nobody wanted to hang around with, because when you're a good girl, you're not regarded as being any fun, which wasn't true, but that's how my peers looked upon me. And that was okay with me, because I didn't want to find myself in situations where I was tempted or I had no idea how to deal um, with the situation itself and what I was going through. So I went through my entire high school years. I had 2 dates, and because nobody asked me, and one of them was a minister's son, and he was very lovely and very respectful, and I liked him, but wasn't attracted to him. Basically, went on a date with him because he'd asked and no one else had. And then there was another young man who asked me, and I went with him because I knew he had experienced what I was experiencing, was this incredible sense of being rejected, right, by the opposite sex. This sense of rejection that comes because nobody's noticing you, nobody's interested in you. And I knew he was in that same situation. So when he asked me, I didn't want to hurt him. I was sensitive to what I felt was probably his pain. And so, we went out the one time, but again, I didn't feel an attraction, so we didn't go out again. It was at the point where I wasn't even asked to my senior prom. And to this day, interestingly enough, that sort of remains a wound. And because I was, in 1977, I was New Hampshire's junior miss, which back then was a scholarship pageant. It wasn't a beauty pageant. It was a scholarship pageant. It was based on your academic achievement and physical fitness and talent. And so I was New Hampshire's junior miss in 1977, and I didn't go to my senior prom because nobody asked. And so that was very, very hard. So, I sort of carried this, this pain, right, of having this sense of no one noticing me or being interested in me and feeling rejected. And at the same time, holding this deep moral compass that I wasn't going to engage in sexual behavior before I was married. So there's this part of me that was grateful and this part of me that struggled with that. So I was always sort of had that struggle. And then when I went to college, it's like a new beginning, right? You can kind of start over and people see you differently. And there was this young man in the dining hall who used to punch our meal tickets. We had punch meal tickets. He was very handsome, and he was a Marine, and he noticed me, and he paid attention to me. And I was just very excited with that. And we did date quite a bit, and he was actually quite the man about campus and had a reputation with the ladies, but I held my ground with him. And we had some contact. He was 2 years older than me, so we had some contact after college. And he had said to me once, you're the kind of girl that a man wants to take home and introduce to his mom. He said, my grandmother would love you. So, here he was, he was quite promiscuous, and yet he held this deep respect for me. So, I did date in college. I didn't date a lot because once the boys find out they're not going anywhere, they quickly lose interest. And then between my junior and my senior year, I had a summer job at waitressing at a restaurant. And I became involved with the owner's son, who again, I found very attractive. And when I look back now, and I look at, even though I was attracted to him, because my history was one really of feeling this deep rejection, my involvement was more because he paid attention to me, right? He was interested in me. So then I was interested in him. And we became engaged in short order. I don't know if this summer passed when I was already talking to my mom about marrying this guy. And my mom was a beautiful soul and allowed me to be the adult that I was at the time. And she would question me, are you sure, Lynn? She'd say, has this guy ever lied to you, Lynn? Because she saw things and she saw these red flags happening. And of course I was all, everything is great. So we dated in the summer of 80 and got married on May 8th of 1981, 2 weeks before I graduated from college. I had just turned 22 years old. And I married a virgin. So although, so part of this, the conversation, right, is also being real and honest about our mistakes. So he was my first experience with any sort of sexual behavior. We did not have intercourse, but we certainly, were involved in other things. And I think it became because of my deep moral compass and that I had let my guard down in that regard. It's not that I felt guilty, which I did, yes and no. If I recall now, because I was committed to him, I felt less guilty. But what happened was I felt obligated because now I had opened that door and I had allowed this person to touch me and, in ways that I had just never. And then if I'm going to be honest with myself, I enjoyed it. It's part, sexuality is a pleasurable thing and hadn't experienced that. So even though there were many, many red flags, I felt this deep sense of obligation. Should never have married him. And yet I did because of where I was coming from. So it didn't take long. We actually separated for the first time within 3 months of our marriage. He was unfaithful. And I later found out that he had been unfaithful literally since the beginning of our relationship, our dating relationship, and later said to me in a fit of anger when things weren't going well, I said to him, "You only married me because I was a virgin." And he laughed. And he said, "Yeah, you don't have that anymore now, do you?"
Oh, Lynn, I have a question. Do you think your mom was picking up on this?
Yeah, I do. I don't think she picked up on the part that that we were involved in sexual activities, right? That she would have certainly been very hurt by. She would have been deeply hurt by that. But she picked up on the fact that he wasn't honest, that he didn't treat me well, that he wasn't treating me the way that I deserved to be treated. And that's why she'd asked me things like, "Has he ever lied to you?" But she kind of stood back in the background, and I've never questioned that. I've never said, "Gee, Mom, I wish you'd said." And she's gone to be with our Lord now. It's been 6 years, so I never questioned that. It was that when I look back, right, I was 21, and all of this was very new and happening to me, and there wasn't anything she was going to be able to say that was sort of going to take me off the track that I was on and the direction in which I was.
So, Lynn, it sounds like this has been beautiful, by the way. You're explaining everything so well and describing things very vividly. So would you say now, I guess, again, hindsight's always 2020, but, you were a little, correct me if I'm wrong, a little pre the John Paul II generation where we had the beautiful yes teaching of the church. So it wasn't so much we don't do this, we don't do this. Chastity is all these no's. And more like like that fear-based kind of teaching around our human sexuality. Whereas Emily and I experienced, well, not right away, right? But when we found the theology of the body, we're more of that John Paul II generation where we have this great yes, like, oh, we understand why. It's not so much saying like, oh, sex, no, 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 bad, 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 until you get married. And then all of a sudden it's good. It's like, well, no, our human sexuality is a beautiful gift from God. It's always a beautiful gift from God. And here's how we live that out as man and woman in different seasons of life. It doesn't sound like that's what your kind of framework was. Right.
No.
Okay.
Was the no.
Right. Lots of no-nos. Yeah. Okay. Right. And then not having feeling like you had a context in which you could ask questions at home and have conversations and explore these things. So, okay. I don't want to interrupt you too much. So, I just wanted to kind of to dive a little bit into that. All right. So go for it, I guess. So you're married now. Are you expecting yet or no?
Yeah.
When things start to turn rough?
And I don't remember how it came about in retrospect. So we were not using any artificial means of birth control. I was, however, this was before the NFP, where you're checking mucus and things like that. I was on a temperature method, so it was a form of NFP, and you took your basic body temperature every morning at the same time, and you watched for your differences in your temperature change. So we weren't using any sort of, and some things are hard to. So this is something else I found later. He never wanted children. And so his method of being, his sexuality was, and of course I was a virgin on our wedding night, so I didn't know what this person was like aside from how he was treating me. He would withdraw. And so that I'm still surprised that, I didn't get pregnant earlier than I did, but that's what it was. And then we separated at 3 months because things weren't good. He wasn't coming home at night. I was spending my evenings, it would be 1 o'clock in the morning, and my first thought was not this man's being unfaithful. My first thought was something happened driving home from the restaurant. I spent more nights than I can count driving back and forth between our apartment and the restaurant looking for his car in a ditch. And of course, the whole time he was just with different women. So we separated that first time, and then about 3 months, and then we got back together. And then time frame, I remember it was around Christmas, so I don't remember if it was the first Christmas or the second Christmas we were separated again around that time for the same reasons. Things were just really bad, as you can imagine. And it was I was then getting a lot of pressure from my mom in particular to return to my marriage. And I never had, divorce was just a foul word. It was just never going to happen to me. It didn't matter what I was going through, but the separation was necessary because things were so difficult. But I was getting a lot of pressure at home to return because I had gone back to live with my parents at that point. So it was during that time that I did become pregnant with my son. And I don't recall now, there was a lot of trauma around this time in my life, so I don't recall if I was still taking my temperature or what was going on. But I did become pregnant with our son.
How did you feel about that, and how did your then husband receive that?
Wow, that's a good question. So many things are just blacked out. I'm pretty sure I was excited. Oh, because the part I forgot to tell you, right? Growing up, I loved playing with dolls. And my hope my whole life was to have a large family. I wanted 12. I always used to talk about having 12 children. I just loved children. I started babysitting at 11. I always wanted a really large family. And that hadn't changed at that point. So I'm sure that I was excited. I don't recall his reaction. I don't recall a negative reaction. I don't know that I recall a positive reaction. It was probably more of a neutral thing. And we were separated when I became pregnant. But at that point, that's when I went and I moved back home. So that from then on, you're building this pregnancy, and I'm very excited, and I can't wait to meet this child. In the meantime, he's continuing his philandering behaviors in the background. So,
Lynn, did you know that was happening at the time while you're pregnant, or is this you found out later?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. I do have another question really quick. How many siblings did you have? Were you close with any of them as you were growing up?
So I have an older brother.
Okay.
And we're not. Part of it was just because it was a boy and a girl. We're extremely different personalities. And I do have a younger sister, but she's 5 years younger than I am. So as I was growing up, she's 8, I'm 13. We had, nothing in common. I was in college when she entered high school. So we're close now, but growing up, I didn't have that advantage. So.
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah. Please go back to the pregnancy time and kind of tell us how that went, and especially how you're feeling about your marriage. I'm curious how your parents were feeling once you found out you were pregnant, if they were excited about that because maybe they thought, oh, this will get her back with him, perhaps?
That was never actually vocalized, but I think that was sort of the underlying message. They were happy when I said that I was pregnant, and they were happy when I went home. No, I had never talked with my mom about, because I really was naive, and obviously marriage for me, we were married in the church. We had a sacramental marriage. I was never going to be divorced. And so I don't recall ever talking to my mom about the driving back and forth to look for my husband in the ditch, and the things that were going on. I don't recall talking about those things. I don't know what I told her when I moved back home and why we were separated. I can't recall that. And I really think it's the trauma at this point that I black things out. As far as my pregnancy, I had an easy pregnancy. I was excited. This is what I wanted my whole life. I waited my whole life for this. When I held my son, in my arms, I'm going to cry. Sorry. It was like this real life doll that had come true. He was just everything to me. And so he became this place that I could place the love that I could not give to a man that did not love me in return. So it just, it meant a lot. And things didn't get better. He continued to not be home at night. After he was born in September of 1982, we did not separate again. I would not have left the home with my son. And we never, it's interesting to me, as bad as things were, I never used any form of birth control at that point in time. I'm sure I was still taking my temperature. He continued to just withdraw. So he was using his own form of birth control. And when my son, and I say he's my son because he's had no contact with him in 30 some odd years. My son's 43 now. When he was 18 months old, sort of the straw for me was he used to take these really long showers, like 45 minutes. And the bathroom would get nice and steamy. So we lived in this old drafty apartment. So I would put my son in the bathtub when the bathroom was nice and warm and steamy, because it was warm and steamy in this drafty apartment. And he came in to shave after I'd put him in the tub, and he decided that he was hot. So he opened the door while my 18-month-old was in the tub. And that was just, it's like the light went on for me, that a man who could be this selfish with this little boy, that he was more concerned about his own comfort than he was about the child. It was like this light went on. But I didn't leave because I was never going to leave. I was going to stick this out and be married and suffer through whatever I had. I believe I still wanted more children because that was always my dream. And so what happened in 1984, about a week before Easter, he left. He left us. He was involved with another woman. So that was our final separation. He left. And I should probably tell you, you've probably gotten an idea that he's pretty much a heel. But when I did have our son, I had a difficult delivery. My pregnancy flew by like nothing, but my delivery was difficult, and I had developed an infection. So I was in the hospital for about a week. Back then they kept you. They didn't send you home. He had a woman in our bed while I was in the hospital after I delivered our son. And, I kind of knew, because I remember going home and he had changed the sheets. And I said, that's weird. Why did you change? I had just changed the bed before I left. And I don't remember what he said. It just completes the picture that this is a deeply wounded man to behave this way. So when he left us, there was a sense of relief, to be honest. It was just before Easter. I felt great hope in that we were approaching Easter. And so what I did at that time, because I was really seeking God's will in my life, and divorce was a part of it, I started a 54-day rosary novena. I had never done one before, and I had just learned about it. So I began this 54-day rosary novena, and I just asked God to show me his will in my life with respect to this marriage, which was Catholic sacramental marriage. So on day 54, I got a knock at the door. I opened the door, and the sheriff is standing on the other side, and he served me with divorce papers. And I remember I just smiled. I started laughing. He must have thought I was the weirdest person ever, because who has joy when they're served divorce papers? But you don't understand. this is the final day of my novena. This is about as clear an answer. God could have written me a letter, and it wouldn't be any more clear than this is. So, he proceeded with the divorce. Took us about a year, I think, that we were divorced. So that's kind of the end of that chapter in my life. He was never really, he did see my son a little bit afterwards, but clearly wasn't really interested. I don't remember at what point I decided to file for an annulment.
Was he a practicing Catholic, Lynn?
He went to church with me. So he was Greek Orthodox. He had been baptized. He had received the sacraments in the Greek Orthodox Church, certainly was not practicing. And that was one of the things that was the great deception for me. And as sick as it sounds, I really do believe he married me because I was a virgin. It was this idea of conquering a virgin, because he started going to church with me. I often went to daily mass. He started saying the rosary with me. There was this whole deception that was involved, and a lot of people were fooled by it, except for my mom. She wasn't.
So after, I'm so sorry too, Lynn. That is just very sad. But after I couldn't help but laugh when you said, like, on your last day of your novena, that soon knocked at the door. But so after you proceed with that divorce, how old is your son? And then what are you doing? Are you working? Are you back home? Where are you living? Kind of what does life look like?
So he was not quite 3 when the divorce finalized. Took about a year for the divorce to finalize. I did go back to work. I had been, and again, having a large family, being a stay-at-home mom, all of those things were what I wanted to do. And I had been home with him, and unfortunately had to put him in daycare at that point as a single mom. And it was absolutely heart-wrenching. My mom picked him up a couple of times midday, and he would just, or when I would pick him up at the end of the day, he would just collapse into my arms, absolutely sobbing. I removed him from one daycare setting to another, which was more of a family home setting. My son was a thumb sucker, and he needed that comfort, and they tried to get him to stop sucking his thumb. So that was sort of a trauma for him. And then there came a point in time, the divorce was settled. I was receiving a small amount of child support and alimony, but I was really good with money, and I was able to make that work. And I was like, you know what, this just isn't worth it. And so I left my job and I went home, and I told my son was very precocious. He was, believe it or not, he said his first words at 6 months old. He was talking in sentences by the time he was a year. I didn't realize how extraordinary that was till I had other children. So, I could just talk to him like he was an adult, basically, when he was 3. And I remember picking him up at daycare the last time and telling him in the car that there wasn't going to be any more daycare. And his eyes just lit up. He goes, "I get to stay home with you, Mom." So, and again, exact time frames are different. So I had started at that point going to a fundamentalist, evangelical prayer meeting. My very dearest friend was a very devout Christian, not Catholic, and she lived in Massachusetts. And so I would go to their Wednesday night prayer meetings because I wanted that community, I guess. And, I love my church, and my church is good about creating community now, but not so much back then. My mom was terrified that I was going to leave my faith. I felt like, Mom, you don't know me. That's not going to happen in a million years. So she told me all about a charismatic prayer group that was close by. So I started going, I went to a healing mass first. And at this healing service and mass, it was a day-long kind of retreat. Most people there were my age, but I remember at that point looking over, and there was this younger man, and he was very attractive. It's close to my age. And I found that really interesting. He definitely caught my eye. And then the priest became a friend of mine and ours later. invited me to the young adult charismatic prayer group. And this young man just happened to be one of the leaders. There were 3 leaders, and he was a leader. So there was this meeting that happened that I didn't organize. And then I remember being attracted to him and praying that if this was God's will, that he would have to initiate the whole dating thing, which he did. But again, we're going to go back to me and operating from this place of my wounds and this deep core wound of rejection that I had felt as this goody two-shoes teenager that no one was interested in. And this dating history that I had in college that no one's really interested in me because I'm not willing to go those steps that these men wanted to go. And then obviously this traumatic event with this first marriage and this man who never really loved me, and trying to be this good Catholic woman at that point. So I'm operating from that point of woundedness. I was 26, not really aware of the depth of the wound. Meeting this attractive Catholic, that was the first thing. He's Catholic. And it's not because of me that he's Catholic. He's going there. He's attracted to me. He accepted me. He accepted my 3-year-old son as his own. From the beginning, his family accepted us. And so here I am in this place again of somebody wants me. Somebody wants my child, when at that point in my life, honestly, trash. Nobody's going to want me. I'm divorced. I'm not a virgin. I have a child. I'm a single mom. Nobody's going to want me. And this person did. So I'm not going down a road of, he was a good man. He was a good man. We were really not a good fit. But I didn't see that because of this perspective I'm operating from, of this point of trauma and woundedness, in pain. And yet, all these years later, I can look back and I really believe in my heart that God brought us together. Now, you probably know the end of this story already, that, eventually that didn't work out. But even today, I look back and I really believe God brought us together, and we just made a big mess of it. Because you don't have to be perfect, right? You don't have to have this sense of this perfect intertwinedness and interest in having these shared interests or personalities or whatever to make things work. You have to have a willingness to work through everything. So, and feel free to interrupt whenever you want. So we get married. We did not engage really in any sexual behavior outside of kissing before our marriage. I had learned my lesson. I was not going anywhere with that. And we were married in the church. I was annulled at that point by our priest friend who introduced us. It was a beautiful mess.
Can I interrupt you for 1 second, Lynn?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not a canon lawyer, but just briefly for those that are listening that may not be familiar with what an annulment is. Oftentimes it's wrongly referred to as, Catholic divorce, and it's not. So the church does not approve of divorce. An annulment is going back to the point in time in which a couple took their vows, their sacramental vows, and they entered into the marriage. And through kind of like, quote unquote, an investigation, the church has uncovered, because of evidence presented to them, that in fact the two parties that entered into that sacrament, because they bestow the sacrament on themselves, marriage is the only sacrament that's done in the church like that. So they administer the sacrament to themselves, that one or both of the parties was not fully aligned with or capable of committing to the parameters of a Catholic marriage. So one of the parties was not truly open to life. One of the parties was, you could list quite a litany of things actually. And so that's when Lynn is referring to her first marriage being annulled, the church is saying that marriage did not actually ever exist. So it's much different than a divorce where we would say, oh, these people were validly married and then now they're not validly married. Like in the church's mind, that doesn't make any sense because we believe, no, once you're married for the whole of your life. unless there is this process of annulment. So if I think I did not describe that well, ladies, one of you can correct me, but just to kind of give a brief definition of what we're talking about. So when you're entering into the second marriage now, engagement and marriage, Lynn is, in the eyes of the church, in the eyes of God, she was never married before. So this is technically a kind of a quote unquote first marriage. Just like when we go to confession and we come out, it's all gone. So it's similar to that.
Right. So we, both being devout Catholics, we talked about how we're going to manage our family. Artificial means birth control were never part of the conversation. We were both open to life from the beginning, because at that point, my son, we were married in October. He turned 4 in September. So we were open to having a baby right away.
Can I interrupt you one more time, Lynn? Can you frame for us a little bit at the time what's happening in the church? Like the Catholic Church in general, as far as the conversation around birth control is okay, birth control is not okay. How did you guys decide that, discern that? Was the priest involved in teaching you, like, hey, here's what the church teaches? Did you both already know that? Was it, I'm just so curious because it's, it was a little bit of a different time than where we are now. Was it a lot of people didn't know, or a lot of people were being told? This is what I've heard, right? Is like back then, like a lot of people, I don't mean back then, you're not that old, Lynn, but like at that time, like some couples were being told by priests, oh, it's totally wise and prudent to use birth control. And other people were, being told no, et cetera, et cetera. So
I think at that point in time, my belief was you could kind of make up your own mind using your own conscience. Although I just knew, and I'm trying to think back when my husband and I had these conversations. He was open to what I had to say about it. And because he was also a devout Catholic, he wasn't going to say, no, we're not. And he wanted children as well. So, but, I'd actually heard priests say, there are times I kind of leave it up to the couple. You figure it out. We did go on an engaged retreat. There was a name for it at the time that I don't recall, that most married couples could choose to do. And I do believe that there was some conversation at that point about not using artificial birth control. That was opposed to church teaching. It was grave sin. But it was just not something we were going to do. So I became pregnant 2 months after in January. So we were married in October. I became pregnant fairly quickly. We were so excited. But I lost that baby at 10 weeks. It was a blighted ovum, so that never chose to develop. I had crocheted some little baby booties, so I still have those in a hope chest that my dad had made for me.
Oh, Lynn, I'm so sorry.
So that was really disappointing, obviously, very difficult to deal with. It was our first child together. But then I got pregnant again fairly quickly. I'd had to have a D&C. And I remember being so concerned. Are you scraping out a baby? I was just freaking out about that. And we did have sonogram. They were able to show me there's the amniotic sac. You could tell there was just nothing there. That I had actually probably lost this baby very early in the pregnancy, and it just took a while to start miscarrying. So they were able to convince me that there really was no live child in there. And so I'd had D&C, and they said that the point was to sort of make my womb healthy again and just nice and clean. And then I got pregnant with our oldest daughter, Amy, who was born in February of 88. So we continued to, at that point, no, wait a minute, it wasn't at that point yet. I believe I was still taking my temperature.
Were you home with the baby, with the kids, and your husband was working? Okay.
Yeah, that was just not going to be any other way. And for anyone that's afraid to do that, I will say, my husband was an electrician, very young. Even for, at that point in time, 1988, he was making very little money. But I stayed home, and I was great with money. I knew how to manage. He used to say, give Lynn $1 and she'll come home with $10 worth of goods. So, I was able to manage things. I loved being home. I just loved being home and seeing those first expressions and the first steps and the first words. I couldn't fathom not being with my children and being home. I got pregnant again when Amy was 8 months old.
Ooh, Lynn.
That was a little traumatizing.
Yeah.
I wasn't sleeping through the night yet, and I was a tired mama. And in fact, I remember greeting my husband. We had a split entry, so he'd come in the door and had to walk up the steps. And he got home from work, and I started walking down the steps. I just burst into tears.
Understandable, yeah.
And he was actually wonderful. He goes, "Oh, it's okay. It's a baby. It's going to be great." And he was just wonderful
Aw.
and supportive. And so Emily was born 17 months later. Um, and that was okay. We were still, it was hard. I had these two little kids, but it was okay. And you loved them and you adored them.
And was your son in kindergarten or first grade at that point, or he was in school?
So he was in kindergarten. So yes, he did start kindergarten the year Amy was born in 1988, or maybe he started at 5. No, I'm sorry. His birthday was the 30th of September, the cutoff date. He actually started kindergarten at age 4.
Okay.
We ended up holding him back because he was just too young. So later on, we held him back a year. But yes, so he was in kindergarten at that point. But it was half day. Now every public schools are full day kindergarten. But he was in big. So then we move along, and things are great, and we're happy, and things are moving along, and we're living in our home, and we have this big yard, and then when Emily was how old was Emily? Well, I can tell you the difference in age between Lauren and Emily is 21 months. So and I remember at that point, so it was after Emily, actually, thinking back now, we took classes in actual NFP, mucus, baby stickers, the whole bit. We got really engaged and we did that. And so we took these classes. Now, so at the time, aside from having, because we'd had this young family, I was actually done at 3. I was like, this is plenty. Forget the 12. So I still had this mindset. I had this mindset of we're being open to God's plan for our lives because we're not using artificial birth control, but I wanted to control it. So I was like, yeah, we won't use barrier methods. I won't take the pill, but I'm in charge here. So I don't want any more babies. 3 is enough. And so we took the actual NFP, and I'm charting and I'm doing all the stickers or whatever. And then I got pregnant with Lauren. And it's like,
Lynn.
Wait a minute, these babies, like these bigger babies, I shouldn't have been pregnant. So, I don't recall in my mind saying, okay, Lord, this must be your will. I think I was more like, another one.
Absolutely. Tired. Yeah. It's always a shocker. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and they were 21 months apart. She was born in March of the following year. But the God's grace, right? Lauren was born on Holy Thursday. The year she was born was Holy Thursday. And Emily, too, I have to tell you, so God knows my heart, and he knows, like, the day the sheriff showed up on the doorstep with a summons for divorce. I need those tangible signs in my life where God is really showing me his will. And I've just told him, you just need to make it clear. Like, if you're not writing me a letter, you need to do something that shows me. So Emily, if I go back, was born on the Lord's Day. Now, I was late for her, but she was born on a Sunday. So I took that as, okay, Lord. And then Lauren's born on Holy Thursday. So I had these 3 babies. Amy was, I believe, still in diapers at the time. She was like 2.5 or something. And then I had Emily, and then I had Lauren. But things are going along fine. We're doing pretty good. It's hectic. But we're neglecting ourselves.
But is your husband still happy and enjoying having the kids too?
I think he does well. I do.
Okay.
He's a good man.
Yeah.
He's still a good man. And he was a good man. But we started neglecting ourselves, right? We're busy with our kids. We're not taking time for ourselves. We went out 4 times a year, my birthday, his birthday, our anniversary, and his Christmas party. Other than that, we weren't. It was always our family. We couldn't afford a lot. So we went camping. We bought a pop-up camper, and our vacations were camping. We were always together, and we were always dealing with children. I think that's about the time we started not attending to our marriage like we should have.
How old were you guys at this time?
So when I had Lauren, I was 32. I had my son at 23. Amy, I was 27 when we got married, so I was 28. So we had them pretty quickly. So at the time I had Lauren, I was 32, I believe.
And your husband was around the same age?
You're older than I am.
Okay.
We're the same age. Yeah.
So still looking at quite a few years of fertility as
Correct.
you continue your marriage. Okay.
But I'm okay. We're going to keep using this NFP stuff. It's going to be good, but I'm going to get back in control. And then also what we were dealing with at that time was a medical issue that I had. So that medical issue sort of preempted us being able to be together. So between the times we couldn't because we were trying to avoid pregnancy and the times I was dealing with the medical issue and so we couldn't, I actually got to the point where I was feeling like I wasn't being a wife in that regard to my husband. And so there was some discomfort growing in me with that regard. And I started to churn over in my head this idea of artificial, means of preventing conception. But we didn't. We still didn't do that. So then we started to have some rocky stuff in our marriage. It wasn't big, anything out of the normal or whatever. And then when Lauren, and I'm trying to think, so I'd have to calculate ages and months they were born, so I'm not going to do that here. But I then, not long after Lauren got pregnant with Anna Rose. And that was a traumatizing pregnancy. We were using NFP. I get pregnant. I was charting heartily. And I looked at that chart and I said, there is no way. There is no way. I met with a priest. It's like, this is like literally not possible. Like 8 days had passed between ovulation and conception. I said, this is not possible. And so I eventually reconciled to myself and I tell her that God really wanted you. He really wanted you. And I think that's when I surrendered to this idea of, NFP isn't about control. NFP is about surrendering control. And NFP is about really accepting God's control and God's providence and God's will in your life and really trusting that He'll provide regardless of how you feel. And so my own angst and my own anxiety, and after she's born, I still remember my head coming home from the hospital. So I had 4 girls in less than 5 years, in about 5 years. I'm on the bed in the bedroom, and I'm nursing the infant. And you know how it is. When you're nursing a brand new infant, you're very sore and you're tender. And I had these 3 little heads bobbing around me that were so young. And the next youngest, Lauren, at that point, she's sucking on her fingers and she's trying to see the baby. So she puts her hands on the baby's forehead and she rips her off my breast. And I thought I would hit the ceiling. And so that was sort of my introduction to being home with all of these little kids. And my son was 7 by then. So poor kid, he kind of disappeared in the midst of all of that. But yeah, so that was really it was like, this isn't about. So when I look back now at my how I was in dealing with all of that energy in the house and the busyness and the laundry and the meals and running kids around and I was a meticulous housekeeper, so I had that pressure on myself. When I look back at those years now, it's now that I say I surrendered and accepted these beautiful gifts that God gave me, these beautiful children whom I love beyond measure. But I never really surrendered control. So any anxiety or restlessness or exhaustion that I felt were because I just didn't surrender the control to have my house in perfect condition, the control for the children to be perfect. We went to Sunday Mass and their hair was perfectly combed and they were in little dresses that I had sewn. And so, I look back and say, if I had been in the position spiritually to truly surrender, which is something I still struggle with in my life, I think things would have been a little different. But so long story short, things were going along pretty well. I mean, I remember mostly how busy it was. It was just busy, but busy in a beautiful way. And then things just became, we started to hit a rocky patch in our marriage. And I don't want to get into that too much because he's a good man and I was a good woman and we were good people. And we both made some very bad choices at that time. And so we ended up after 18 years of marriage divorcing. Now, I will say he chose divorce. I never chose divorce. In fact, a week before our hearing, and it was a very messy divorce. A week before our hearing, I invited him out for ice cream and I begged him. I said, I don't want this. I said, we were separated, obviously. I just said, we're married till death do us part. I said, let's just remain separated. I believe time heals all wounds. I think in his mind, a separation was like a divorce. I think he was fearful of what that meant. I think he was fearful of holding that. And so obviously that didn't happen. We did divorce. And it was very, very hard on the kids because we were the perfect Catholic family. We sat in the front pew of church every Sunday. And then we're no longer going to church together. And the kids are going back and forth between different households. So that was difficult and painful, especially for the kids. And I will say, now I'm still married because we had a sacramental marriage. So sometime after we were divorced, I did date, but I'm not being sexual, so I'm excusing that in my brain. And I shouldn't have been dating, right? But I'm not being sexual, so it's okay. I'm going to date. I don't want to be alone. I'm still a young, attractive woman. I don't want to be alone. He was dating. He was dating throughout the period of our separation. He was not unfaithful to me, so I want to be clear. I mean, he is, if you look at the technical part, we're married. We shouldn't be dating. So I was seeing a man that I liked a lot, who was wonderful to my daughters, and wanted to make a commitment to me. But he was he was a non-Catholic. He was someone I'd actually known in college. He was Jewish, loved me in college, and that didn't go anywhere because he was Jewish. And he started going to church with me. And so I'm in this cycle again of, a man changing for me. And I decided that I wanted to show him that I was willing to make a commitment. So I filed for a second annulment. And my heart wasn't really there because I'd always believed in my heart God had brought my second husband and I together. And so I was just praying, Lord, you need to show me your will. You need to show me your will. I do not want this if this is not your will. So the process of annulment is very long and very involved. You're interviewed. You have to provide witnesses. He was interviewed. It's this big, long thing. It takes a really long time. So to fast forward in the process of annulment, once the tribunal had not made a decision yet, but they had reviewed the case. And so once they do that, they kind of send it back to the person who's petitioning. And I got to read the testimony. And so sort of reviewing things and how they are. And what I felt, if I'm going to be perfectly honest, I felt that things were twisted in a way to make the annulment happen. I felt things were put in a way, things that I had said to make this happen. And my mom was deeply opposed to it because she believed that many annulments happen. And she didn't believe that they were right. And I said, Mom, you have to understand, I'm praying for this. I'm praying about this. And I believe God will show. So when I read that testimony, I got so upset. And I handed that paperwork back to the local office of the tribunal. And I said, I want you to know, you need to correct this, this, and this. I am not interested in this. If this is what it takes to get an annulment, I do not want it. And I said, I want you to correct that. So I don't know what happened from there. And I just left it and I said, Lord, if this is not your will, I do not want any part of this. And I left it in his hands. Now, at this point, probably 3 years had passed since my divorce. My former husband was very angry. So we didn't have a good relationship at that point because he was angry about things. Because in his mind, too, divorce didn't happen, even though he pursued it, and we both played roles in that, obviously. So I went to grad school. I was working as a paraprofessional, but I knew I had to have a way to support my children as a single mom. I had 5 children at home. All of my son was getting ready to go to college. So I became a special education teacher. And the day I graduated from graduate school, I was like, okay, what do I put on this degree? Do I put my maiden name? Do I put my married name? Who am I? Who am I? So I wasn't comfortable with my maiden name. For a while, I hyphenated. I mean, my married name, I wasn't comfortable with putting my married name, and so I hyphenated the name. So I decided, you know what? I'm going to put my maiden name on this degree. So here's where the good Lord comes in again. Or I've been praying and asking for his will in my life, even though I'm really feeling, honestly, pretty much like garbage at this point. I have failed not once, I have failed twice. And now I have failed 5 children. So I'm going to get emotional again. My daughter had soccer practice that day, and I stopped to pick up the mail. And so we went to soccer practice, and I'm sitting in the car, and I'm opening the mail. Now, this is the day I graduated from graduate school. Had a big ceremony. I walked. I collected my degree in my maiden name, and I'm opening up my mail. And you know what's in there? My annulment decree. And so I just burst into tears, and I felt that was God's way of saying, it's okay. It's okay. So I think he understood because he knows there was just a point of no return. And, my former husband was wounded through the divorce as well. I think he had a harder time with forgiveness than I did. And I think God knew that that's kind of how it would be for the remainder of our lives. So, and on multiple occasions, I've written him letters, saying I'm sorry and forgive me. I've never heard those words, although we're really close now. People who see us would say, "Why are you two divorced?" We get along really well. He's involved with somebody else, and I've never been involved with anyone since. I did date a little bit, but I ran into the same thing. Men who only wanted one thing, men who didn't respect me. They didn't know the color of my eyes before they wanted to get into bed with me. And I was like, you know what? I just don't need this in my life. And I made a commitment about 15 years ago. I'm going to live my life out as a chaste single woman. And I've been happy with that decision. And so today, right, fast forwarding, what I live with is the wound of the loss of my family. Sorry. Because that never goes away. After 18 years and 5 children, and he always treated my son like his son. He used to say to me, there'll be no steps in our family. So you have that history, 18 years of history, and it goes away. You can't ever share that history with somebody else. Yesterday, and it's interesting, the gospel reading was about St. John the Baptist, and my youngest granddaughter, who will be 3 months old in 2 days, was baptized yesterday. So, of course, we're all together as family, and, but it's not the same. I'm their mom, and he's their dad, and he's the grandfather, and I'm the grandmother, but we're not together. And because we get along, and because he's a great dad and he's a great grandfather, the grandkids don't understand, what's going on. So, the lesson I think looking back is True surrender means letting go of control. And you have to be aware of your wounds. And I think that's hard when you're young and you're immature, when you're spiritually and emotionally immature, being aware of those, what your wounds are. So you're not led by your wounds. You can't be led by your wounds. And I think most of my life, I've been led by my wounds. And so and I try to tell, I have one daughter who's married. That little girl was their fifth. And I've tried to tell that, when you're having a hard time, you have to confront those times and you have to move forward. And so I think that's the beauty in natural family planning, is totally trusting in God and allowing him to give you what he has planned for you and not what you have planned for yourself, because it's so much bigger.
Oh, Lynn, what a beautiful story. I'm so sorry. Yeah, for that hurt. I think I love you for so many reasons, but I love your honesty, and I think there's so much to learn, from this wonderful experience and this tapestry that God has written with your life and is continuing to write with, your children and your grandchildren. And I feel like there's always so much hope when I hear these stories, which is one of the reasons why I really wanted to have you share, because it's an important story. When I reached out to Lynn to ask her, she was very apologetic, kind of self-conscious of like, well, I've made these mistakes and there's these failures and this and this. And I was like, but God's still pursuing you and he still loves you. This is still a love story, which is what I love about the church and who God is. A love story, quote unquote, isn't necessarily like a Cinderella story. There can be real wounds and real sufferings, but that God is still there. And I feel like that's just such the message of Advent, that God comes to meet us. He is pursuing us. It doesn't matter if you're in the penthouse of the Hilton or if you're in the stable in Bethlehem, God wants you. God wants you, and he wants your soul, and he wants your love, and he wants your heart. And it's really hard when you are being pursued, when you're feeling unpursuable, and damaged and wounded and aware of mistakes. So I appreciate your honesty, because I think it is hard when we can admit, like, I didn't do this the way that I kind of wish I had done it, and there might be some feelings of regret. And I feel like in our culture nowadays, we just don't talk like that. It's no, everything was great. I did everything great. And life just kind of happened to me, or, I feel like it's just not human. There's just no human experience then to say, well, no, there were these really hard things and I made this choice, but framing it in this like, and also I have this hindsight of like knowing my background and my own wounds and this experience. So yeah, it was just so beautiful. Thank you so much, Lynn. I'm so grateful. Emily, do you have anything you wanted to say or ask?
I'm just in awe of your humility. Like, I just appreciate you sharing everything. I feel so moved. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Lynn. And maybe we can close out if there's, based on your experience, you have a lot of life experience just in life in general, not just in the context of something like NFP. But, if there was one thing, I guess, kind of going back to your young self that you would, even like your formation, I do kind of wish that maybe I had a different perspective on, on human sexuality or in raising your kids, or I don't know, you don't have to like think of a long list, but something to maybe tell like a younger version of yourself as you're pursuing marriage and family.
Oh gosh.
Well, and even thinking about your grandbabies that you were just talking about, like what might you tell them as they progress through adolescence?
Well, I probably wouldn't talk directly about sexuality with my grandkids unless they specifically asked me. But I would focus on the beauty of what that's meant to be. My grandson's 15. Actually, he was his sister's godfather, which is kind of sweet. And I worry about where life is going to take him, because he's in public school and exposed to things. And part of, I would focus on, I would just say to him, focusing on the beauty, but really encouraging him to talk openly with his parents, with his dad, especially. He has a good dad. And I didn't have anyone to tell me that. I know in retrospect, my mom would have been a good listener. I think she didn't know how to initiate the conversation. It had never been initiated with her. So that's what I would encourage my grandkids. And that's what I would encourage myself, just not to be afraid of talking to your parents. I think it needs to be your parents, not a good friend. If you don't have parents you can talk to, maybe an aunt or something, but not to be afraid of that and to realize you're going to be received, in unexpected ways.
That's excellent. Awesome. Okay, well, we will list, Emily, I don't know if you thought about this, but I was thinking about the Pearl and Thistle book that she wrote about healing. We had a great guest on, Lynn, and she does a lot of programs for adolescent girls, and she's Catholic. They're just so solid, really great products and programs. And she also wrote a book for women, for moms who have experienced any type of wound in the area of human sexuality, so that they can go through their own healing journey, so that they can be more present, better moms, right, for their younger, for their kids and even for their grandkids. So I thought about that as you were sharing some of your stories. So I'll link to that book as well. Are there any resources or anything, Lynn, that have helped you over the years as you've kind of moved in and out of different seasons that maybe we can share with our listeners?
I wouldn't say anything specifically. I mean, if you could see my bookcase, it's in the living room. It's just all spiritual books, 100%. I've always loved that. So, I mean, for me, what got me through all of that was adoration, was all of these spiritual books. I've read everything every great saint has ever written, and especially during the time when my second marriage, the first one wasn't a marriage. So, the second time when that was falling apart, adoration in particular, was meaningful to me. And so I would encourage people to try to find some place for adoration and in reading spiritual books. In this day and age, spiritual direction is not something you can find. Priests are too busy, and finding a good priest to give good spiritual direction is also really challenging. So even at this point in my life, some days I wish I had that, right? And I don't. So I have to rely on God leading me to books. And like I said, I have so many. There's really nothing in particular. I've liked John of the Cross and St. Catherine of Siena. So Carol Hauslander has really touched my soul. So, I'm kind of a deep thinker and I'm a deep soul. So those people that write that way and engage that way, it means a lot to me. Daily Rosary it's gotten me through more things, even on those days when it seems like just words. I've always said my rosary. I've never given up on prayer, ever, even in the most difficult times. And I've just seen those sorts of miracles in my life when I tell you how God's talked to me, right? That those aren't coincidences. So you look at what you read, go to adoration, obviously Mass.
Awesome. Okay, well, we will link to a couple of those people that she just mentioned and a little bit of some information on the rosary and adoration for those of you that might not be familiar with those spiritual practices. So thank you so much for your time today, Lynn. My boys are downstairs. I can already hear them destroying the downstairs, waiting for me to make breakfast. So I'm going to get down there, but I'm so grateful for you, Lynn, and I hope you have the most blessed rest of your Advent season. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you. Bye.
That wraps up another episode of the NFP Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you found our discussion enlightening and empowering. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. We'd love to hear from you. Please connect with us by sending us an email with your questions and stories to thenfpshow@gmail.com. We'll be back next week with more insights, tips, and heartfelt conversations about natural family planning. Until then, love responsibly.